Hi, welcome to Morse Lake Monsters, Chapter 3, The Barn Encounters, in Elto, Michigan, 1977. Links to Chapter 1 and 2 in the description below. Chapter 3, which was after Mike's Woods incident. There wasn't actually more than a week and a half, if I remember right. And the reason why I remember it right was I remember later the agent talking about it at my kitchen table with some of the other agents. And they're figuring out how long it took, what they thought how long it took for Mike to follow me from the woods to my house. Well, it didn't take a week and a half. There were several incidents where we were seeing what we thought were dogs, big dogs, because we're getting looks at them running away from us. One of the incidents, and both of these I didn't draw because, well, for the first one, it would have been difficult to draw, and it was really brief. There was a time during that, sometime during that week, before the barn incidents and after Mike's Woods, I was down playing with my neighbors, and there's 4 of us in the cornfield there. This is before Tim was seeing his orangutan, imaginary friend, in the cornfield. And when we were playing hide and seek in the cornfield there, it wasn't very, it was right next to the house. It wasn't like we're quite a ways away from their house, and their parents were home. And we were playing around in there for some time when we came across an area of corn that had kind of like all the corn ripped up. It wasn't very big, probably about the size of a living room or something like that. And all the corn was piled up into one pile, and we were kind of, perplexed by it, I guess, a little bit. A bunch of 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds. And we walked up to the pile of hay, and I saw an eyeball on it, or not the pile of hay, the pile of corn that was all piled up there. And I saw something staring back at me. And it was an instant that we all saw something run out of there. It looked like a giant dog, and then run into the corn. But it was literally half a second, and it went so fast, we just thought it was a huge dog, because it wasn't more than a couple steps. It was in more corn that was, 6 feet, plus tall. And that incident was pretty brief, and we went and told our parents about it. Actually, Tim's parents, and they said not to go back in the cornfield because, my dad was, telling him that he was seeing some weird dog incidents, on them feeding on the cow. A week earlier, my father at night had seen the Sasquatch feeding on the cows, but he never told anybody about it. Next encounters that happened were the ones we were wrestling, and I did do the drawings of those, and it was at that time, it was a couple days later of the incident where we saw them in the cornfield. And by this time, Tim was seeing his, what we joked around with each other was his imaginary friend, the orangutan, in the cornfield. And Tim had joined us in this wrestling that we're playing down by the creek, tearing up the grass with Brian, Sam, and I. And he took off, to go back in the cornfield, and we continued on. And at one point, we looked over in the bushes next to us, and there was a face over there. And no sooner we saw it turned around, and all we could see was the brown hair and its butt running away. We thought it was a dog again, but this one seemed to be a little bit smaller. And this is another thing that I thought of the other day, that this one being smaller, and what happened with it might have been at Strawberry Lake. There was 4 of them, and 2 smaller ones. I don't know if there's 4 of them. We never saw 4 of them at Tim's or my barn, but there's a little bit of, see, when we were wrestling and we were seeing this in the bushes, Tim was supposedly playing with the one in the cornfield. And that just kind of makes me wonder, because we chased this one that we saw while we were wrestling, and we thought it was a dog. We thought it was a loose dog And the day before, we had captured one of the neighbor's big dogs that got loose. That's not usually loose. And we thought this was another stray dog, so we chased it until we got to a drain pipe where it ran up into, and it jumped this creek that we're playing next to a couple times, and I think it ran up a tree, and we lost track of it. And the smallest boy, Sam, said it went into this drain pipe that went underneath the road. And then we went over to investigate it after he'd found it, and the one boy, Brian, had like started poking it with a stick because it was stuck about, like, I don't know, maybe about 6 feet. We could barely see it. It was stuck in this drain pipe, and it couldn't seem to go any farther, and it was barking at us, which was another weird thing. And he was poking it with a stick gently and trying to get it to move or come back out, and then it started meowing like a cat, and we thought there was a cat stuck in there with it. And then it started growling like a dog, like an angry dog. And we just decided we're not going to deal with an angry dog. And we left. And as soon as we got back to about Tim's house, and Sam was Tim's brother, and Brian was the neighbor boy. Their dad got home and saw that we tore up the grass and started yelling at us. And I wasn't allowed to come over for a week. So there was this week or a few days, I think it was only like 3 days before I came over, if I remember right. And I wasn't allowed over for a while, and we had to like buy grass seed to replace the grass that we tore up. But we told him what we saw, and he didn't believe us either. I mean, it sounded kind of crazy anyway. This thing was making 2 different noises, and they just thought it was a bunch of little kid imagination. This is the incident that happened while we were wrestling, and in the bushes we saw what we thought was a dog. It quickly ran away. We gave chase and ran it into a drain pipe and left it there because it was making all sorts of weird sounds. Okay, the incident happened when I was going down to Tim's house that day that I was going to go down there and find him by the cornfield looking for his orangutan friend. I went out to the creek, and I followed the creek that went from my property down the road, and eventually went down to his house, and I followed that to where we're underneath the road, underneath these big drain pipes, and it looped back the other way to east and west, and went on the road a couple times. And there was one spot where I was I found that it was deeper, and I was trying to make it even deeper by taking as big as rocks as I could find around there, and almost making a dam to where I could just basically have a place to get wet and go underwater a little bit, because it was a small, shallow creek. And before I got there, I'd found a couple of the neighbor's traps, and back then he was trapping raccoons for pelts. And I found one that was alive in a trap and had just his hand in the trap. And I'd set it free by finding a stick long enough to try to pry the trap open to get the raccoon out of there. And when I got to that other spot where I was moving all the rocks to kind of make a pool to where I could swim in or go underwater, this is before I had went down to Tim's, kind of sort of on my way down there, just taking my time. That's when I saw something walking up the creek a ways down where it went down to Tim's house. It went down on an angle, but there was a lot of trees out there, and they kind of made a canopy of trees all the way down this creek like it was a tunnel. And I saw something walking towards me in the creek, and it was kind of just a silhouette. And the first thing that popped in my head was it was this neighbor Ken, and he was looking for his traps, walking the creek like he usually does and checking his traps. And I didn't want him to know I had set all his traps after I found that raccoon, and I went and found all his traps and set them all with a stick. And I just paid attention to my little pool that I was building with the rocks there, and didn't give the shadowy figure another look. But soon after that, I heard something in the grass on the bank next to the creek, and that was Mike. It was, all I saw was his face, and I couldn't quite make it out, but he was on the bank really close to the road. And I went to go check him out, and then he turned and he left towards the cornfield that was behind him, and there was a car coming. And by that time, I had made it up the embankment from the creek to the road. And it was some other neighbors that I've only met in school. The whole family was in this red Ford station wagon, this LTD station wagon they had at the time. They called Big Red, and which also the neighbors called their Big Red pickup truck Big Red. It was kind of confusing, like all the Mikes. And they saw this big dog-like creature, which was Mike, which is bigger than, and wider and thicker than a dog, but it wasn't like a huge, like an adult Sasquatch would be, but it was still pretty bizarre to see, even from a distance, as they were coming closer towards me, and they decided to pick me up and give me a ride down to Tim's house. The neighbor's a little bit further down. I wasn't even that far, but they were that concerned that this dog looked rather big. And that was one of the incidents that I didn't draw because when I first started, you can tell that like the early art is a lot more rough than the art that I do now, and I couldn't handle drawing that creek with all the trees and the leaves going down it. I could now, but it would still take me a long time because there would be a lot of detail in the water and all that. But I wanted to draw it. I'll probably draw it for the second version of the book. That'll be longer than the first version that I put out. And that's that encounter. I made my way right down to Tim's after that because neighbors dropped me off right in front of his house. This is Harris Creek, the creek that goes in between our two houses where I was playing. And the big dog that was spotted and the neighbors that gave me a ride the rest of the way. When I went back down there, it was getting to be about Labor Day weekend. Most of the family had gone away and left the babysitter with the baby, and Tim had stayed back to go look for his friend in the cornfield. Suppose Dad found this out when I got down there, and the babysitter told me this. And she said that Tim was in the cornfield playing with his troll friend, that she had seen it pop its head out of the cornfield a couple times. And I said, okay. So I went over to the cornfield, which is, 30 feet or so. I'll show you the picture. It wasn't very far from the house. It was a little tree line. I went over across the tree line, and there was a little bit of clearing of the edge of the cornfield where Tim sat before the corn was, and it was pretty tall that year. And this cornfield stretched all the way from my house to his house, which is about a little over a mile, I think it was. Well, anyway, he was sitting there in his underwear on a kickball, and he had his clothes folded up next to him. He had Tonka trucks, he had footballs, baseballs, his sister's toys, his little sister's toys out there, like Barbie dolls. And he goes, well, you just missed him. You scared him. He went back in the corner. I'm like, sure, whatever, Tim, and he's going like, well, I've been trying to coax him out with all these toys, trying to get him get out of the cornfield and, come out into the open. And he said, I read this in this Encyclopedia Britannica that he had. They didn't have computers back then. And this little 8 or 9 year old kid had looked up how researchers got close to orangutans and what orangutans like. He knew they wouldn't go across water, orangutans, supposedly what he read. And he even showed me later, and they went cross fences and odd things like that. He said he learned from reading that. So that's why he was sitting there in his underwear. And he was trying to get this thing to come out, and he said it just left. And all of a sudden it pops back out for whatever reason. I think he tried calling. I'm not sure if he whistled or he called it by what name he gave it. He gave it the name Mike, and he said he could say Mike. I'm going like, by this time I'm going like, okay, right, Tim. And it wasn't very long in this juvenile Sasquatch he called Mike, which actually I think was Sammy from Strawberry Lake, which was also a name I never gave him. I never gave him a name. he pops his head out of the cornfield, and I was kind of shocked. He looked more like an orangutan, and he had more of a reddish brown to his hair than I remembered him. Maybe because maybe they're darker color when they're younger. You know, there's no mistaking it. My memory of them was like dark brown to black with black skin. All four of them when I was, that's why we thought they were chimps. But to me, this did look more like an orangutan, and it didn't take much coax, and he came out of the cornfield, but he like waddled out, kind of hunched over, and he sat on his butt with his knees up to his chest, and he put his arms around his knees as Tim tried to coax him out a little bit further and talk to him, and he rolled a couple baseballs and a football at him, and he pushed a Tonka truck towards him, and he pushed him all the way, and he pushed that kickball, that red kickball, towards him, and Mike had backhanded the thing and hit it so hard it popped and it went into the tree. And Tim thought that was pretty funny. I thought it was, a show of power. I don't know. But, this went on for a couple of minutes, and Tim was saying all these different noises he can make. And he did say he could say his name, and he got him to repeat his name. He goes, Mike, and the juvenile Sasquatch goes, Mike, kind of like he was burping. I go like, well, that's in right. It didn't really sound like a perfect speech. And this is the actual cornfield next to the house. This is where I met Tim while he was sitting on the kickball when he was trying to coax the juvenile Sasquatch Mike out of the cornfield. And this is when he had the kickball pushed towards him, and he swatted it. And when he said his name, Mike. Now, after he broke in, he didn't even really give me much of a look, and he just made a beeline to the south side of the barn and that pile of hay where he went to go sit down. And he walked right through this little town I had built with various boards and pieces of wood that I had found to make a town for my Tonka trucks, and he didn't pay any attention to that either. He just walked right through it. A little bit better, but as it was, I thought I was pretty safe with this orangutan, so I didn't, I had my guard down, and I went over to the other pile of hay, which is probably, I'm guessing, 15 to 20 feet away from the other pile of hay, or it could have been as little as 10 to 12 feet, but I can't remember. The barn's not there anymore. It got taken by a tornado in like 1981 or something like that, if I remember right. Anyway, he's plopped down with like his feet in front of him, sitting on his butt on this pile of hay, and I did the same thing and sat there, and I remembered Tim saying all these sounds that he made, and he can say his name, so I made the best sounds I could, like a cow, and I did a cat, and I did a dog, I did a baby cry, and I'll explain that when I show you my drawings. Each time I did each sound, he would answer back with every sound that an animal would make, and it sounded exactly like that animal, like a cat. And he would do, like a kitten to a cat to a hissing, angry cat. And he did the same thing with a dog. He would go through all these different barks and growls. And it was amazing. And like, I guess, I was 10 years old. I didn't really think much of it. I was going like, wow, he must have learned all this in the wild, but it got more bizarre. Because I got to a baby cry, a human baby cry that I can do pretty good. And I thought there's no way that he could do this. And he did a human baby cry better than I did. So the next thing I did was, and I don't even know where I learned this either. It was like a half hum and a half whistle, like that. I used to be able to carry that for a lot longer. I did that. That's when he answered back with, I didn't hear any sound either. He just looked like he was melting. And it must have been only for like a moment, because I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe it was the lighting, because everything was closed up in the barn. There wasn't much sunlight coming in or anything like that to make it just, and plus it was a ways away. I didn't know what it was. So I didn't think much of it. I thought it was me. When Mike came into the barn and he went to the south side of the barn and he sat down on the pile of hay and I sat down in the other pile of hay, the distance between us was probably about 10 to 15 feet. That's what this picture represents. This is the time then I tried to get Mike to make different sounds, much like Tim was. And I tried a whole bunch of different sounds. Here's how it went.
Can you move? Like a cow? What about a cat? A dog? Mike. Okay, what about a baby crying? Can you do that?
And then I thought I could fool him with this half whistle, half humming sound that I could make that I don't even know where I learned it from. But I tried that. And then this is what happened when he answered back. He looked like his face was melting momentarily. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe for a few seconds. But I didn't give it as much thought. He was a ways away, and I thought it was my eyesight going. And I didn't pay any attention to it. I just started to approach him after that. I was going to go check out his weird-looking feet. But I thought it was me. I approached him after that, and he got up, and he started tugging on my shirt. And that's when I remember what Tim said about, them, not being comfortable around clothes. I thought, well, I'll just take my shirt off. By the time I got my shirt off, he was sitting back on the pile of hay again, with his feet sticking up like this, but he was like waving his feet and like, it looked hypnotic. They're just going like, they're moving all over the place. And I'm like, that is the most bizarre looking feet. I wanted to go check him out. I just thinking, oh, this is an orangutan. He's friendly with people. I don't have any problem getting close to an orangutan. So I went up to him, I took my shoes off, and I'm looking right at his feet, and I put my feet right up against both of his feet, and he pushed me backwards when I did that. I put him up against his feet for maybe a couple seconds, and he pushed backwards, and I rolled back into the pile of hay. And I was laughing. I thought he was just, it was playing around, something that an orangutan would do, right? 10-year-old boy logic. Well, he rolled me into the pile of hay where there was the other rope that was identical to the one that he was set up on. And I grabbed it and I put my foot in it, and I thought, well, we'll see what he can do. He can make all those noises and see if he can do this. And I put my foot in it and I ran all the way around the pile of hay really fast until I could, spin around and then jump and plop in the pile of hay. I did that, and then he kind of looks at me and he grabbed the rope immediately and like started going right upside down, and his feet like closed like that onto the rafters like that. I'm going like, because he was a little bit bigger than a chimp would be, and I thought, I was like, this old orangutan is going to kill himself. He's going to hang himself on that rope, because like he has the rope in his hands and he's pulling himself up with his feet. It was really bizarre. But what he did was pushed off. He went like taunt with the rope and he pushed off of it. He did the same thing I did, only like way faster, like you're watching a cartoon. Like boom, and he plops just like I did. It was like, ha! And then I went like this and beat my chest. I pulled the gill again. And that's when things went really bad, because he kind of looked at me and he beat his chest, but when he did that, he screamed like nothing I've ever heard before or since, not even in any recording. It just sounded like a wild, the first thing that went in my head was a baboon, because he opened up his mouth and I could see these teeth, like these long canines come down that I'll explain later in the next chapter. But I could see those big teeth come down, and I thought baboon for some reason. His eyes were glowing red and he's screaming at me. I'm freaking out thinking this isn't an orangutan, this is a baboon, and he's pissed off. So I started running towards the first caster door I can get to, and I was going to jump out of it. And there was that latch I was trying to do, and I tried to get the latch open. I couldn't even get it open. He grabs my ankle and pulls me back, and something's banging on the door, and I was thinking it was finally my dad on the hay door with the casters on it. And he pins me down, and my head's right by that door, and it's still banging. And he starts going ooh, like this close to my face. And I couldn't hear any more sound like that. It eventually sounded just like air, and I couldn't move. But I knew what was going on. I couldn't scream. I mean, other than the fact that he had my arms pinned down. The door busts open. It's not my dad, it's his mom. She comes right in and sits right next to me. Now, I don't know if she did this or not, but one of them ripped my pants off. I had a belt on. I still have a scar that goes like from my belly button all the way down to the inside of my Well, the next thing I knew, he came up to me and he was checking out my shirt, and he started tugging on it like he was trying to take it off. And then I remembered what Tim said about the clothes, that they don't understand and they don't feel comfortable with them. So I took my shirt off. Oh, this is where we were comparing our feet before he pushed me backwards into the hay, and I grabbed the rope and did my rope trick before he did his. Well, it was Mike's turn next, and he just stood there for a second, and all of a sudden he started grabbing the rope and going upside down, feet towards the rafters. He grabs the rafters with his feet, and my exact thoughts, honest to God, back then were, oh my God, this stupid old orangutan's going to kill himself. And he grabbed those rafters and he pushed off on the rafters with a rope to gather speed to spin around that hay pile like I did in that rope, and he plopped down in the middle on his butt, even better than I did. And then this is the point that I decided to beat my chest. Well, he followed and outdid me again, and his eyes glowed. I saw his teeth. He made a bunch of noises that I've never heard before, and really, really scared the crap out of me, so I ran. Absolutely terrified, now I ran towards the hay bale door, which I had locked earlier. And then I felt something grab my ankle. And Mike got up on top of me and pinned me down. The door started banging. For half a second I thought it was my dad, but it wasn't my dad. The door busted open, and it was a face of what I thought was a gorilla, and I couldn't move. Mike was making a sound like a humming sound coming out of his mouth. I couldn't only move, I couldn't even make a sound. There was Mike's mom. She came right into the barn right next to me, and they ripped my pants off. They actually left a scar when they did that, pulling down out a belt on. They ripped a bunch of flesh when they pulled down my pants and ripped them off. Apparently I learned later that my parents had seen the adults approaching the hay barn and coming up to the milking barn from the house, and must have called the cops, and they thought they were bears. They're approaching the barn on all fours, is what they told me later. And I'll get to that also, more details on that, what they told me later. But what my dad didn't expect to see was, when she saw my dad and she's leaning out that hay bale caster door, she grabs Mike, and Mike grabs my arm. She jumps out at the same time. This all happens really fast. And she makes a run for it with Mike in her hands and jumps down, but Mike's got my arm, and his grip breaks as I get just out. And luckily I was going flat, and it was only like a 7 foot tall, fall into a bunch of really long grass and hay and stuff that was down there. At this point, Mike's mother sees my father come down with a shotgun. The male is hiding behind the barn unseen by my father, and she grabs Mike, and Mike grabs my hand at the last second. As she jumps out, Mike still got a hold of me. I shoot out of there, but he loses his grip after a couple feet out of that door. I fell about 7 feet straight flat on my back. My dad helped me up, and when I finally got up, I could finally breathe. I finally screamed. I fall right on my back, and it knocked the wind out of me. I didn't have any clothes on. My dad's standing there. But he's not even looking at me with, he's looking at what he's seeing over there. Was, I saw this when I got up. And when I got up, my dad picks me up by my arm while he's still looking at him, holding the gun in the other arm. And when I catch my breath, I couldn't scream when I was up there. I couldn't make any sound. And when I finally could, I screamed. And that's when Mike started to break loose from his mom. And his mother was like about 7 foot tall, maybe at the most. Black skin. The father was much bigger, maybe 7 or 8 foot, but he was blonde with kind of like brownish gray skin. He actually was probably too big for her to hold anyway, and he broke loose and ran back on all fours to my dad, and stood up on his hind legs and looked at me, looked at my dad. And then he grabs me by my hand or my wrist and starts pulling me towards him, and I'm freaking out by this time. I'm screaming. And my dad shoots into the air. And later he tells me he didn't have any intent, I'll get to that, of shooting them, especially with the gun that he had. He didn't think would even do much good. So the adults run off when they hear the gunshot. I mean, immediately bolt. And this is so weird that I remember all this because it happened so fast. I remember the adult male Sasquatch, the blonde one, getting his foot caught in the fence, going into the cornfield on all fours and dragging a couple of the posts with him before it let go. I remember that so distinctly. Oh, this is an illustration of 3 Sasquatch with Mike breaking free from his mother and running back on all fours and then standing up in front of my father and I, and then he grabs my arm, and that's when my father shoots the gun and scares away the adult Sasquatch, and the male gets his foot caught on the fence. So the adult Sasquatch are gone. And Mike runs away, but he noticed nothing happened other than the noise when he gets to about the fence line where the cornfield is, and all of a sudden decides to come back at us. And we didn't have anywhere to go, so we ran into the barn. And that first door into that barn, it was a very old barn then. It was 120 years old. And, there's missing pieces of wood here and there, and some were just held up by one nail, and they'd move around like this on the bottom. I mean, it was a solid barn other than that, but it's seen better days. We went in that first door. It didn't have any kind of latch left to it or anything, and a couple boards are missing on the bottom of it. So we had to go into a second room into the barn, and he's still coming towards us, and he's like trying to rip those doors apart that were all, ratty, and it didn't take it very long. We got into that second door, and that one closed with a lock on it, and I had my back towards it. But the problem is, this barn had 2 big huge doors on the north side that already had great big holes. I mean, we're in a room that had holes everywhere around it except for where my back was against that wall and that door. There was even a hole right next to my shoulder. This is my father and I running back into the barn while Mike is chasing us. And these are some explanations to the holes in the barn. This hole in the barn and this hole in the barn were both facing east and supposed to be the same hole where he stuck his gun out of, and had a loose board on top that would move. And this is the big hole on the northern facing caster doors that was there when we moved there. My dad goes like, I don't know what to do. All I got are like birdshot shells. And he used to be a gun hunter, but he switched over a bow hunting, and this is the only gun that he had left for house protection. And that's all he had. And he no sooner said that than Mike had reached through this little hole that was next to me. My back was up against this door, and he reached through and grabbed my arm and tried to pull me through this little hole. And it got pretty violent. It hurt, and I was screaming. And my dad had to use the butt of the gun on Mike to get him off me. And Mike screamed, and after that, it went quiet for a minute. This is where Mike had to reach through a hole, and he was trying to pull me through that little hole. My dad had to hit his arm with the butt of the shotgun. Okay. Okay, things were quiet for a minute. So my dad went over to the east side where that board was that kind of like was hanging on one nail, and he started looking out there, and the barrel of his gun was sticking a little bit out, and he peeked out there to see if he was gone because it was quiet for a little bit, and Mike actually grabbed the barrel of the gun and tried to get it away from him. My dad had to shoot the gun to get it away from him. He almost had pulled the gun away from him, and I was already freaking out enough sitting there naked and trying to deal with all this, but when he shoots the gun, Mike releases it, and I think he runs off for a minute, and things were quiet for maybe 30 seconds or so, and then we started hearing the siren, and it was the cop car. This is where my dad was checking out that little hole with a board with a nail on top of it that would move, and Mike grabbed the gun. My dad had to shoot it to get him to release it. Okay, then we hear the cop car. We hear it coming down 92nd Street with the siren going. My mother called the cops. She was still up at the house. The cop car had stopped there first, and she redirected it down to the barns where there was a little driveway that came in towards the end of the milking barn, where that hole was, and those big doors that faced to the north. And as he was pulling in, as he tells us later, he saw Mike trying to come into that hole, and he had literally cut him off with his cop car. And it was he comes in there and asks why I'm naked, first of all, and that, he just cut off this bear that was trying to come in here, and why I didn't have clothes. And we told him it wasn't a bear. We're trying to explain that. Then Mike comes to try to get into that little freaking that board again with the nail on top of it. And he starts trying to come in there when we're in there talking, and they start shooting at him. They didn't hit him, I don't think, and they drove him off. And it got quiet. We hear another siren coming. It's the ambulance. It's a 77 Cadillac. Matter of fact, it was its first year they used it. I actually tracked down that car too. I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. They get there and they pull in and shut the sirens off, and it's still pretty quiet. So they decide to take me out to the ambulance with the cop leading myself and my dad taking up the back. We go around the back of the cop car and go up to the ambulance, and there's two drivers, a female and a man. They get there, and the driver talks with the state police trooper and my dad, and they stand over by the driver's side of the ambulance towards the front of the car, looking towards the barns, just in case with their guns. The ambulance driver takes a .38 out of the glove compartment that he carries in there after he tells them that there's something out there. And as soon as we get into the back of the ambulance, and the female attendant's opening the door, it's like one of those old hearse ambulances, and they're opening the door. Mike makes an appearance over by the cooling barn, which is in between the milking barn and the hay barn, which is a little cement cooling barn that's still there today, along with the hay barn. He just comes right out in the open and stands in this long grass out there, and everybody sees him. And nobody can believe it. They're like, what, is that a bear? That's not a bear. So they start shooting at him, I think in the air, I'm not sure. Well, it drives him off, but he only goes around the other side of that milking barn and starts peeking around the end of it. And it didn't scare him off. And I think at that point, or at some point, that state trooper figured he didn't like the sirens, and he went and turned the siren on in his car and the ambulance, and that drove him off. And I got in the back of the ambulance. They went up to the house and the other cars, and we met up there where they looked at my wounds, the scars that I got. I wasn't like bleeding really bad out of them. They weren't cut down that far down in just a few layers of flesh. I did have to go in to get stitches. While they're attending to me, local conservation officer shows up, and he's talking to A state police trooper in our mudroom while we're in our kitchen, and we hear gunshots at our neighbors to the south. And they get a report almost immediately on the radio that, what's going on down there, and they have to leave. And that's going to be the start of the next chapter, chapter 4, what's going on down there. And I'll get to that in a little bit. That'll be in my next video. Mike made another appearance after just seconds. He appeared by that little white and green cooling barn, peeked around it, and then came right out in the open where everybody could see him. This time, my dad and the cop shot again. And he didn't go very far. He just went back around the cooling barn and just stared at us. By that time, the cop had figured out that he didn't like the sirens, and he went over to the ambulance and turned on the sirens on both the ambulance and the cop car. This scared Mike away for good. At least we thought, so we went back up to the house. End of chapter 3, Morris Lake Monsters Barn Encounters. Just a side note here on these two vehicles. The state police cruiser here was a 77 Pontiac Le Mans owned by the night watchman at the Wayland State Police Post. It was his private car. He used to work at GM, and he had it custom made. It didn't have the gumball on top. It had one of those gumballs with a magnet on it, and it didn't have the badge on the side. I came to find out all this information later. I did find witnesses. The cruiser was being driven by a different officer while his LTD was in the shop. The ambulance, the 77 Cadillac, is still around. There's a collector that owns it. And I'm working on this one next, Morris Lake Monsters Chapter 4, Meet the Real Monsters. Up soon. Thanks, guys. Hey, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. It helps the channel. Appreciate it.